Thanks for choosing the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with another topic, and of course, it intersects with the NFL and the NBA. And there's been a recent quote going around, or a recent statement going around that's allegedly from Charles Barkley, and it stated that simply that Charles Barkley is ripping the NFL for being greedy as far as taking over the Christmas holiday, which is usually exclusively designed for just the NBA. Because even the college sports, college basketball sports, the men and the women usually take a break during this time until I believe after the first of the year, or a couple of days after Christmas. So the NFL has upset the chain of command, or upset the standard of what we also always knew and loved during the holidays. Um, and that's what I loved about Charles Barkley. He never holds back or contradicts himself. He just says what he means, and you can either like it or love it. But people know that's Charles, and they usually take that for that, and they keep going. He's essentially that coworker that always speaks up when you're thinking about something that but you don't want to say, and then Charles says it, and you're like, "Oh, I'm glad he said it." So Charles Barkley is that type of guy that you have to love and admire for that, and he never minds saying what he feels because he knows that he has some truth or some merit to what he's saying. And he's definitely spot on. I agree totally with this NFL situation and NFL being greedy. And I'll count the ways here in a little bit. But just a little background on the holidays. So growing up as a kid, I'm pretty sure everybody grew up the same way. Thanksgiving, we knew that what that was reserved for football and football only. We didn't see any basketball games. They took a break off, and it's still the status quo today. Now, the NFL, on the other hand, wasn't reserved for Christmas. It was just NBA games. You watch 5 or 6 games all day, and that's what it was. No other sports really came on unless it was reruns of some sort on NFL Network, but NFL didn't intervene until, I believe, couple of years ago when they got involved with Netflix and so we'll go stream a couple of games, and then we'll play a Thursday night game. Well, this year was Thursday night because it fell on Christmas, but then they had a game on Thursday night as well. So it definitely conflicted with the NBA schedule, and that's why Charles Barkley said the NFL is greedy, and that's why I am saying the NFL is greedy. And of course, you could say Charles Barkley has a self-serving purpose when he talks about this because it's messing with his ratings, which can ultimately mess with his money in the NBA. But I'm looking on the larger scale of things. I'm looking, even if somebody has a self-serving purpose, there still could be some truth in the merit or the essentially the hate, so to speak. Um, because I never thought a mail-in DVD company would become this big media giant, which is Netflix, right? But I also never thought a book selling company would turn into this online media, online retail store of the version of Walmart, which is Amazon, right? So all of these things that come to be or come to fruition, we didn't expect to see, or we didn't know these things were going to happen because the biggest thing is evolution. I had a friend who was a pharmacist one time, and he told me he was looking for jobs. And I said, "Man, you're making 6 figures already. Why are you still looking for jobs?" He said, "You always got to evolve." And he broke down to how the VCR companies, how some of those went out of business because they didn't evolve to DVD, how the DVD business went out of business because they didn't evolve to digital. So you always have to be a step ahead. And then that's what this situation is about, being a step ahead, because if you don't address things before before they get too bad, it'll be too late. Um, and this is kind of what Charles is talking about, or at least the bigger picture from what Charles is saying, because I'm looking at this NFL being greedy situation as in a macro perspective of the family. Um, these athletes already miss, I mean, they get to spend most of the year with their family, but the holidays are specifically for families. So if let's say the bigger teams like a Kansas City Chiefs and Cowboys, perfect example because both of those teams played on Thanksgiving and Christmas. These teams have to spend time away from their families to play sports, which is cool because that's how they make their money. But at the same time, can these athletes get one holiday to themselves? Because some teams will have to play around New Year's. Some teams will have to play away from their families, away from the field. I mean, away from their home teams and things like that. So it makes it a little bit challenging, but the NFL is not thinking about family. They're thinking about financial. And that is why they're being greedy. Not just because they're stepping on the NBA's toes, because the NBA fans are the NBA fans and they're going to be there. They're going to watch the game. They're going to go out to the games and things like that. And some NBA teams don't have an NFL team, so they don't really have any interest in the NFL anyway. But I do believe they're stepping on the NBA's toes. But from the macro perspective, I'm thinking about the family and how these players are always called upon because they're the cash cows and they always play the same teams on the holidays. They're not going to have the Raiders playing on Thanksgiving or Raiders playing on Christmas. They're going to have the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. They're going to have the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. They're going to have the Broncos because of their fan base and players like that. And these rivalries with the Broncos and the Raiders, Broncos and the Chiefs, they're going to have that, but people are also missing that this year it fell totally down on this backside, so to speak, because the games they marketed for the NFL Christmas days became a total wash. They were totally boring because the Vikings and uh, Lions game was pretty much a dud because nobody really didn't have anything to play for. The Lions did, but they ended up losing, and the game was just totally boring. The Chiefs and Broncos, the Broncos really don't have offense, and they're not really boring. They're more a defensive team. And then the Chiefs didn't have Patrick Mahomes, so it fell on his face. And then you go to the night game, the Ravens. Lamar's been banked up all year. Their offense has been kind of dry, so it wasn't the electric show that they thought they were going to get on Christmas. They could have just had players stay at home for that. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be. So um, it kind of backfired on the NFL because I'm pretty sure they got the ratings, but the retention they probably wasn't there because most of those games people didn't want to see, especially with the Cowboys. The Cowboys didn't have anything to play for. They was just basically getting stats. They put up a lot of offense, but at the end it just became kind of dull. They didn't have anything to play for. So those fan bases wasn't riled up to see these teams play. Most of them was out of playoff contention, which it was just a sad sight to see. Usually it's more to play for, especially last year when they had Beyonce at the halftime show and it was a lot different atmosphere. Made more sense last year, of course, but they're getting greedy with that. But another thing the NFL is getting greedy with is, or being more envious of, is the NFL or the NBA's global reach. The NBA can go get players from overseas, from Europe, from these other countries, and Africa, and get players, and then get these fan bases, and they get all of this, viewership from other places. The NFL is mostly an American sport. You don't really see college football teams from overseas coming over here to play. There's not that much foreign reach with the NFL. So they've been trying to step on the NBA's toes by playing games overseas, been playing, games in Brazil, playing games in Mexico, playing games and all over, the world to try to get this global reach. But you're not going to get the players because, like I said, there's no uh, minor league system or college system that you can get these players from. So I don't understand what the purpose is there. I understand they have fans in other regions and they want to bring that product to them. But at the same time, I think they're just stepping on the NBA's toes and being more envious in the NBA because the NBA has more more player ownership and more player independence. Because the NFL is more of a league where they collude against the players and they kind of control the market. It's not a kind of, they control the market completely. So it's very difficult for players to ascend in that league. And then once you're blackballed or outcasted, you're pretty much stuck there. So I've never seen anybody overcome it. But the NFL is notorious for underpaying its players and overworking them. But it also starts with Roger Goodell. I said this all the time, that a fish rises from the head down. And the head over there at the NFL is Roger Goodell, who's always escaped accountability, especially with the Ray Rice situation, with players continuing to do things off the field. And, they're getting slaps on the wrist, inconsistent punishments, all of these different things. And then they gave him the power to be um, the judge, jury, and executioner, which they need to remove that from them because it's very inconsistent as far as the sanction and punishments goes. Um, and then they escaped accountability with the CTE stuff, which they don't care about the player safety. The only reason they're finding players for these helmet to helmet collisions and hits is because of not because of safety, it's because of financials once again, because they're getting all these lawsuits from people that's getting CTEs from families after they pass away because that's the only way you can test it. And they're trying to avoid those lawsuits by saying, "Oh, okay, we're finding people or we're putting money into this pool to where we can pay people once they sue." Because that is something that's teach from all the way from youth football all the way up, and they're trying to escape accountability for that. So football is a naturally inherently dangerous sport, and there's no way to avoid it. But they need to acknowledge that it actually exists. That concussion movie was a perfect example of them escaping ability. They didn't want that movie to come out, and it did anyway. So it just shows you how much the NFL is, money hungry and greedy and try to escape accountability, which they want their players to be accountable, but the ownership and the leadership is definitely not accountable. So it's very contradictory. The NFL is pretty upsetting. If I had kids that were aspiring to go that route, I wouldn't want them to go that route. At least go to the NBA, but ownership is the way to go. Owning your own stuff and not just being held to these owners that don't look out for the best interests of their players. So Charles Barkley was 100% right. Is usually he has some truth in what he's saying. That the NFL is just self-serving and it is envious of the NBA. But NFL is just like fast food. The optics look great, but you're not actually supposed to indulge in it. So tell me what your thoughts are of the NFL stepping on the NBA's toes and Charles Barkley's comments. And until next time, I'll see you next time.